In the heart of a peaceful little neighborhood, where the paved streets are always clean and the houses are close together with small, pretty gardens, there is a corner that few people pay attention to. There, under the shade of an old tree, a homeless black man sits quietly every day. He wears old, faded clothes. His shoes are worn to the point of almost losing their original shape. Next to him, there is always a small, shaggy dog, with gentle eyes but always wary of strangers. The people in the neighborhood are all too familiar with that image. Every morning, when passing by, they still see him sitting there, his eyes looking far away, sometimes smiling slightly when someone stops to talk to him. However, not many people stop. Most just pass by, not paying attention, or even showing signs of shyness and avoidance. Some of the richer people always hurry past, as if afraid of being bothered. To them, he was just a part of the street picture, an image not worth paying attention to. But there were also people who were not like that. Miss Mary, the owner of the bakery on the corner, occasionally brought him a warm loaf of bread, accompanied by a cup of hot coffee. Little Daniel, the son of the grocery store owner, often ran over to play with the little dog, laughing happily without any discrimination. Some poor workers, although they themselves were not well off, still occasionally slipped the old man a few coins or an old shirt that was still usable. However, many people were annoyed by his presence. "Doesn't he have anything to do but sit there all day?" A rich old lady, every time she passed by, muttered. Some were more blunt. "He should go somewhere else. Sitting here is just making this neighborhood look bad." No matter how he was treated, the old man remained calm. He never complained, never argued or begged anyone. He just sat there, day after day, as a silent witness to the life around him. But there was one thing that no one expected. The old man was not really homeless. His name was Thomas Harrington, a successful retired businessman. He owned a lot of real estate in this area. Even a few shops that people frequented every day belonged to him. But instead of enjoying a luxurious life in a luxury villa or going on lavish trips, he chose an unusual path, transforming into a homeless person to observe the behavior of the people around him. This plan came from a long-cherished thought. When he was young, he had to go through difficult days, struggling to make a living. But then, with constant efforts, he rose to become a successful businessman, owning a huge fortune. However, during those successful years, he could not forget the times when he was looked down upon just because of his poor background. He always wondered, do people really treat each other fairly? Do rich people care about those less fortunate than them? Or do they just consider them a burden on society? So he decided to conduct an experiment, returning to the image of a poor person, to see who would treat him with true kindness, who would only look at him with contempt. 3 months passed, and he witnessed all the ranges of human hearts. He saw poor people who were willing to share what little they had. He saw rich people who did not even glance at him once. He saw pity, indifference, and even contempt. Then one day, when little Daniel accidentally discovered him getting into a luxury car, the truth began to emerge. The whole neighborhood was in an uproar, gossiping endlessly. No one could believe that the homeless old man who sat on the street corner every day was actually a rich man. And in just one morning, the whole neighborhood was in utter amazement. But what would happen next? What would Mr. Thomas do after being discovered? What was really important to him in this strange plan? The answer would change the whole neighborhood forever. As soon as the news about Mr. Thomas spread, the whole neighborhood was filled with gossip. People could not believe that the homeless old man who had sat on the street corner for the past 3 months was actually a rich man. Some people felt ashamed for having treated him badly, while others were curious about what he would do next. The next morning, Mr. Thomas appeared, no longer a homeless man. He wore a neat suit, but still had his familiar gentle smile. In front of a large crowd of residents in the neighborhood, he stood in the middle of the small square and said, "I know many of you are surprised, and probably don't understand why I did this. But let me tell you my own story." Everyone listened in silence. "I was poor. I lived on the streets when I was young. I spent days without food, nights sleeping on other people's porches. I know what it's like to be looked down upon, to be avoided, to be looked at with contempt. But I also met wonderful people, people who didn't have much, but were willing to share. And they gave me the confidence to strive, to rise up." Mr. Thomas took a deep breath and continued, "Now that I have everything in my hands, I ask myself, if I go back to the way I was, would people still treat me like a human being? And I have the answer." A silence fell over the neighborhood. Those who had treated him badly began to bow their heads, while those who had helped him felt relieved. "I'm not doing this to punish anyone," he continued. "I just want to remind everyone that kindness should not depend on one's appearance or status." With that, he signaled a group of employees to step forward. They carried large gift boxes filled with food, new clothes, and envelopes of cash assistance for needy families in the neighborhood. No one was left behind. I want everyone to understand that wealth is not just about money, but also about how we treat each other. From today on, I hope this neighborhood will become a place where anyone can find help when they need it. Tears of emotion began to roll down the faces of some people. Mary, the bakery owner, approached Mr. Thomas and took his hand. "I don't care if you are rich or poor. I just know you are a good person. And I am proud to have had the opportunity to help you even a little." Little Daniel exclaimed, I know you're not an ordinary person, but whoever you are, I still like to play with your little dog." Mr. Thomas laughed and patted the boy's head. "You are one of the few people who treat me with true heart. That is the most precious thing." Since that day, this small neighborhood has changed significantly. People started to care about each other more. There is no longer a distinction between rich and poor, between luxury and common people. Charity meals are held more often. The previous looks of concern have now turned into warm smiles. Mr. Thomas continues to live in the neighborhood, no longer in the guise of a homeless person, but as a friendly neighbor, always ready to help everyone. His story quickly spread further, becoming a valuable lesson on how people should treat each other. And most importantly, true kindness knows no class, status, or money. It comes from the heart. The neighborhood felt a breath of fresh air after Mr. Thomas's story. People no longer passed by those in need without paying attention. Instead, they stopped to chat, ask questions, and were willing to help those in need. What Mr. Thomas had long wanted finally came true. A community where everyone was treated with respect and kindness. But the story didn't end there. A week after revealing his identity, Mr. Thomas threw a big party in the middle of the neighborhood. He hired musicians, set up a small stage, and invited everyone to join, from the wealthy in the neighborhood to the ordinary workers. He wanted the party to be not just a fun occasion, but also an opportunity for people to come closer together, without the barriers between rich and poor. At the party, Mr. Thomas stood on stage, smiling at the crowd in front of him. He held the microphone, his warm voice resounding, "Today, I am not standing here as a rich man or a homeless person. I am just a neighbor like many others. I have observed, I have listened, and I have realized that sometimes we are so busy with life that we forget the most important thing, the connection between people. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning each face in the crowd. I pretended to be homeless, not to test you, but to understand you. I saw open hearts, but also indifference and prejudice. I do not blame anyone, because I believe that everyone can change, everyone can learn to love more. And I hope that, from today, this neighborhood will no longer be forgotten, no longer be looked down upon because of their appearance or circumstances. The crowd erupted in applause. His words touched everyone's hearts, making them look at themselves and how they treat others. After the party, Mr. Thomas continued his journey by establishing a charity fund right in the neighborhood. He used a portion of his assets to help people in need, support poor families, and especially help the homeless regain a stable life. But instead of doing everything alone, he called on all residents in the neighborhood to join in. He wanted change to come not just from one individual, but from the whole community. Surprisingly, many people responded. People who had previously been indifferent began to contribute. Wealthy businessmen began to donate. Stores in the neighborhood organized free food days. A volunteer group was formed to help the homeless. Things changed so quickly that no one could believe that not long ago, this neighborhood was still segregated and indifferent. One day, Mary, the owner of the bakery, visited Mr. Thomas. She brought a basket of hot cakes and said with a smile, "Before, I only thought about selling cakes and making a living. But now I realize that helping others is also a great joy. Thanks to you, I have changed." Mr. Thomas smiled kindly, took the cake, and said, "Thank you, Mary. But the change does not come from me, but from your heart and the hearts of everyone in this neighborhood. I simply help people realize that we can be better every day." Little Daniel also did not forget to visit Mr. Thomas and his little dog often. He always brought biscuits for the dog and often sat and talked with him for hours. He said that when he grew up, he wanted to become a person like Mr. Thomas, a person who was not only successful, but also cared for the people around him. Many years later, this small neighborhood became one of the most livable places in the city, not only because of the beautiful scenery, but also because of the spirit of solidarity and love between people. The story of Mr. Thomas is told over and over again as a valuable lesson for all generations. And despite his age, Mr. Thomas still appears on the familiar street corner, no longer in ragged clothes, but still with his loyal little dog by his side. He is no longer homeless, nor does he need to pretend to be someone else, because he knows that what he once wished for has come true. A community where everyone is treated with kindness, regardless of rich or poor. He smiles happily, because finally he has found a real family among the people in this neighborhood.